Happy Labor Day, Kings Island fans. Labor Day weekend, it means a lot of things to a lot of people, but to the people of Cincinnati, especially fans of Kings Island, they may think of it a little bit differently because Labor Day weekend, specifically Labor Day 1971, was the last operating day of Kings Island's mother park, Coney Island. I'm Ryan Sir, along with Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics. Tower Topics is a podcast by Kings Island fans for Kings Island fans because that's who we are and that's who we care about. So, Don, Labor Day 1971, you were there. Tell me what you remember.
Well, I was there, and Coney Island was a big part of my early childhood. Every Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, that's where my family took us. And that last day, a lot of sadness going into it because my parents grew up going there. So it was a big thing for them. And as kids, my sister, brother, and I, my brother's real young, so he doesn't, really have any memory of it. But it was what we did. We had a lot of memories there, so we were sad as well. And when we went in to the park in Memorial Day, 4th of July, they had this countdown sign up that said how many days were left. So you get down to that last day there, and the countdowns at the very end, and just a lot of sadness I remembered with everybody. It rained appropriately, being the last day for Coney Island. But we still had a great time. I remember at the end of the night. Uh, you know, right before like fireworks. They went over the PA system and talked about the closing of Coney Island and that Kings Island, the new home, was going to be beyond anyone's wildest imagination. So I remember that speech very
Hmm.
well, ingrained in me. So it's amazing what I can remember. I said very young back then, but I remember more about Coney Island like it happened yesterday than what I had for dinner yesterday. So just very vivid memories. But yeah, it was a sad day, um, and we made sure we rode our favorite rides and attractions that day.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of like, I've got the gift of hindsight. Coney Island closed in the form that it was in about a decade before I was born. But, I try to put in the context of if they were going to close Kings Island, but they're going to make a new Kings Island a couple miles down the road that was bigger and better. You know, I think I'd be very torn where half of me would be super excited for the new park, but the other half of me would be like, they're closing my park. So I'm sure that it was kind of like a bittersweet mishmash of emotions. But um,
Yeah, there was, and we knew what there was going to be certain rides from there that we were going to continue to be able to ride at the new park,
mhm.
and there were others that were, they were just going to be demolished, and we were never going to get to ride those again.
Did you ever get to ride the Shooting Star?
You brought up a very sore subject with me,
Mm.
Ryan. um, I was mesmerized by it when I was real little. It was just this big, gigantic white structure, and you would hear the train, roaring by, and that when you were walking the midways. So finally, on the last day, I decided I'm going to ride. Now, I had not ridden a roller coaster in my life up to this point. So it was based on tickets. It wasn't like you just get in line, so you drop your ride tickets into the little slot, go through the line, sit in the train, lap bar comes down. Now the train behind it, goes roaring through the little helix, and it just made this loud noise that you heard. And it kind of freaked me out. I wanted out, so before they dispatch the train, the ride operator comes over and does the bar. I get out. My sister went ahead and rode without me. But so I didn't think much about it at the time. And then the next year, I rode my first roller coaster, the Racer. And if I have one regret from my time just being interested and involved in the amusement theme park industry, it is that I did not ride the Shooting Star. So thanks for bringing that up, Ryan.
Yeah, well, you bring up painful things from my past all the time, and you don't think anything of it. Hey, what's funny is because the most tantamount thing I can think of for me, because we got to make it about me eventually, is I was too afraid to ride Screeching Eagle at Lesortsville Lake, but on the flip side of that, I was able to get that one ride in when they reopened in 2002, so at least I can walk away with that memory. So, yeah, but so you rode,
I rode it vicarously through POV
right.
that you see on
To
YouTube every day.
totally
So I did
worth the
get to ride
credit.
it vicariously.
Okay, so were there a lot of people there? Like, do you think? Yeah, I know you would. told me that you guys traditionally went on Labor Day weekend. Was it busier or less busy, or did the rain affect it, do
I
you
mean, it
think?
was, yeah, the holidays were always going to be busy, with it. I can't really, remember that well, and I had, what's crowded, what's not crowded. Everybody has a different opinion of
Right,
that.
right.
And because every ride was based on the tickets. Now, you could buy an all-day wristband for rides, but not a lot of people did that. The wait times for rides were never, really long that I can recall. So I really can't qualify like how busy it was. I mean, there were certainly a lot of people there, and I do remember a pretty big gathering, around Lake Como and that kind of a thing, and watching the fireworks and a lot of tears in a lot of people's eyes, mine included, my parents, and at the very end of the night because that's what we knew at the time, and that was my biggest childhood memories, up until, age 9, 10 was Coney Island.
What are some of the what were some of your favorite rides there at that age that you would ride?
The rides that I would ride, flying scooters, which became, the Flying Eagles at Kings Island,
Mhm.
the Grand Carousel, the train, which went around Lake Como. There was the rotor. That was kind of a lot of fun when you would stick to the
Yeah.
wall on that and the floor would drop. The log flume was there. That opened. I remember how big a deal that was, and how, my dad was like, "We got to go to Coney Island and ride this." When news broke that they were building the log flume in the late
Mm.
'60s, the Scrambler, we'd ride that all the time. The Lost River. That was a dark ride. You would get in a boat and you would kind of go through this dark tunnel, then you go up a hill, and then you would splash down. That was a favorite. My sister and I would ride that just over and over again. We get off the ride, we get right back in line to do it again. Kangaroo ride. Uh, it was like these kangaroo character, shape of a kangaroo. You would ride that, and you go around in circles. You go up a little hill and hop.
Yes, yes.
That was one, and that was one of the first rides that you saw when you came into the parking lot. The kangaroo ride was like right there in front of you. So that was another one. The Turnpike cars. Love the Turnpike cars. So those were some of the rides that were a lot of fun for me. And my final ride that I rode at the end of the night, it was a night ride. It was on this like rocket ship, and it would go around in circles, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the ones that were suspended, like a
It
obnoxiously
was on,
tall tower
yeah,
and the rocket ships were suspended?
yeah, and they would just like go around in a
Now,
circle,
if I
you know.
recall, and I'm checking your knowledge here on the spot, but I believe that ride actually had a couple of different ride vehicles. The last ones being the rocket ships. Am I correct? I don't know what the other ones were, but I think they rethemed it to rocket ships, but it was something else before that. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, there probably was. I just remember it as rocket ships.
If anyone knows that, please
And
comment on the video
yeah, it was
or
it was like, just go around in circles, but it was fun, especially at night, because the park looked beautiful at night with all the
oh
lights,
yeah, the
you know.
incandescence and stuff, old school. Of course,
Yeah, yeah, old
very
school.
current at the time, but now it's considered old school.
Yeah, yeah, but it just looked great, with all the lights. And so that was one of the things I liked about the rocket ship. Now remember, there's no Eiffel Tower, nothing you could climb up and get an aerial view of the park or anything at that time. So the rocket ship, being elevated, but it gave you that view of all the lights. And so I love that ride, especially at night.
Yeah. So you grew up kind of around Coney Island, um, as they were
Yeah,
dismantling it.
Anderson
Yeah,
Township.
yeah. So, Coney Island's kind of in like the California, Ohio border, a little very, very east of downtown Cincinnati. But did you guys ever like drive past it just to see what was up as they were dismantling it? How did that feel?
Well, interesting enough, the park, when it closed at night, as soon as all the guests were out, they started working on it right away, dismantling rides, the ones that were going to be going to Kings Island. And the next morning, they're on flatbed trucks. The Sky Ride came down really quick. The carousel was moved up there. So a lot of those rides, it didn't take long, So by the time, so we're talking September 6th, 1971. So by the time they got to November 1st, those rides were not only at Kings Island, but a lot of them had already been installed at Kings Island. But yeah, we did go by to see what was still there. The train track was still there, that went around Lake Como. Right in front of there too was the Turnpike, car track. You could see that. You could kind of look in a little bit as you got into the fall, because the leaves and that would come down, and you could see, the buildings and that were still there, but a lot of the ride structures, were gone. Lost River was still up, that structure. But yeah, we would do that just to see what was going on. But we would also, about once a month, we would drive up to Mason, Ohio, which my father referred to as out in the boondocks from where we lived in Anderson
As
Township.
many
28
did
minutes to
back
get
then
there.
because there was nothing in Mason.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was one problem my dad had with Kings Island. The other thing was he couldn't believe that they were going to charge six
Mm,
dollars to get in. Now, I think when my dad, if he'd have thought about it, as much as we rode all the rides, we certainly were spending more than $6 on ride
right.
tickets at the time. So you just don't think about that when you're doing it. But we would go up to Mason and we would drive by the park. Columbia Road drove right by the front
Yep.
gate, and there's still parts of that road. When you're coming into the park, you go down behind, like in Vertigo and Timberwolf back that way. That's Columbia
Yeah,
Road.
that's the original Columbia
So you
Road,
could,
right?
yeah, so you could drive right by it and look in. They didn't have the front, gate facade or anything like that up at the time, so you had a great visual of the fountain being constructed. We saw the Eiffel Tower going up. That went up pretty quick, actually. You could look back and you could see the house where the carousel was going to go. You could see the racer had been constructed. So by the time you got to the fall of 1971, I mean, the racer had been built. So you could see back and see the racer back there. You could see some of the buildings on International Street, starting to go up. So we saw that progress. My dad would pull the car off to the side of the road and he would take some pictures. I don't know whatever happened to those pictures. I would love to have those pictures now of the park going up. But yeah, we would definitely do that. And, we would drive by Coney and just to see what was there. And then they kept Sunlight Pool open.
Hmm.
So we would go back, not the same, when you go into Coney on those holidays back in the 70s, because all you had was the pool there. And we would walk around, the park and see stuff that was still, some of the structures were still up, but every year, fewer and fewer of them. But I could go there today and I could walk the property and I could tell you where certain attractions were, where the Midway was, where the Shooting Star went. For the longest time, there were still the footers from the Shooting Star that you could see. It was a grass, field by that, later in the 80s, and
Hmm.
but you could still see where those were. And then, River Bend, when that was built, part of River Bend, where that is now, was, where the Shooting Star kind of ran along that. It ran along the Ohio River. So didn't ride it, but I was very aware of where it was. But I could tell you where the Lost River was. I could walk around and point all those different spots out. The Land of Oz. So just a lot of memories there. It's amazing, when you really love something, have a passion for it. No matter how young you were at the time, how vivid those memories still are. Here's some, what, 52 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to do a video short of walking around because I've always been curious as to where the stuff was. Because for me, Coney Island has always been, the giant pool and several smaller rides. But just knowing the history and knowing that this park sits where a much bigger park was several decades ago is always been
Yeah,
fascinating.
and the charm.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
I really haven't been to too many parks that have that same kind of charm that Coney Island had. Had an acknowledged reputation as the finest amusement park in the country, during its day in the 50s, the 60s, all the way up to 1971. I mean, they kept the park in beautiful shape, very well landscaped. Everything would look like freshly painted all the time. It's unfortunate they had those issues with the floods.
Yeah.
But I was at a park this weekend with the Kennywood, just outside of Pittsburgh, and the charm that that park has. It brought back memories of Coney Island. It had the same kind of feel, looking at the buildings, and they kind of came up around the same time, opening in the late 1800s. So to go there, it rekindled memories for me of Cincinnati's Coney Island and what my first impression of amusement parks were.
Absolutely. And I guess that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fun fact that they had what the ginkgo trees, is that how it's pronounced? And they would cut those
Yeah.
into kind of like topiaries where they would be cone shaped.
Hmm.
They moved those to Kings Island. They were in Coney Mall for several years. Then when they redid Coney Mall and decided they didn't want the trees, as opposed to cutting them down, they transported them back to Coney Island. I don't know if they're still there or not, but they went back home. I think that's super interesting.
They did, yes. Yeah, but those were, very memorable too. That midway at Coney Island, with those trees. When you walk down, and there's still photos. If you do a search of Coney Island, you'll see that aerial shot from up from the sky ride
Yeah.
and, looking down the Midway, and you see those trees, and it was just beautiful.
Now, if you want to know what Coney Island looked like as an approximation, there is some artistic liberty taken, but Entertainment Junction, the world's largest indoor train display, Westchester, Ohio, has a whole exhibit that lays out Coney Island. It's got a working shooting star. It's got all the different rides. You hit buttons and the rides operate and stuff. So if you want to walk down memory lane or just learn a little bit, then that's the place for you. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and they have that. One of the buttons. Yeah, one of the buttons is that speech that was given on the end of uh, the night on September 6th, 1971.
Like Gary Walks, yeah. Yeah. I keep on wanting to say it's a night that'll live in infamy, but that's a different speech. Yeah, his exact quote, and this is featured in Fun Fireworks in 50, a clip of it was something about like Kings Island will be the new park. It'll create new memories and it'll be beyond your wildest expectations. And I think for almost everybody that visited Coney Island, it absolutely did the next year in, the spring of 1972 when the new modern, almost Disneyland of the Midwest. It was the Disneyland of the Midwest opened up.
Well, it did, and especially the Coney Island section of Kings Island in 1972 and throughout the 70s when that first opened, the way they had that midway laid out where you had your Coney favorites, the Tumblebug was there, the Scrambler was there, the Dodgem was there, the Flying Scooters,
Yeah.
were there. Haley's Comet. Now that's an interesting ride that Kings Island had. It had the big star on it for Haley's Comet. That star came from the shooting star.
Somebody posted that
So
on
that was the
social
one thing they brought
media.
over.
I saw that. I never
Yeah, that
realized
was
that, but it makes perfect sense. They look exactly alike.
yeah, yeah, that was the one thing that came over. They, had thought about moving the shooting star, trying to relocate that, as roller coasters do get relocated to different
Right.
parks. Um, but the cost to do that, it just made more sense to build a new wooden roller coaster. And then later in the 70s, before the Beast was built, that was one of the considerations when they were looking to build a new roller coaster was let's rebuild the shooting star because right before the shooting star was torn down, the Al Collins and Jeff Grampies that they went out and they surveyed the shooting star and got all the dimensions, everything about it, so they could have recreated it. But at that time, when they were looking at the space where this would go, they thought that gave them a chance to really build something special, which they did with the Beast. But at the same time, they thought as good as it would be for nostalgia purposes to rebuild the shooting star, they already had a ride very similar that was immensely popular with the racer, so they went with the Beast.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of factors involved with not moving it because again, it would have cost a fortune. In today's world, they don't even really do that with wooden coasters. They used to do it a lot in the early part of the
Yeah.
20th century. Uh,
Yeah, now today, if you wanted to rebuild it too, the codes have changed, so it could not be the same exact ride. You'd have to have a little more spacing between, some of the hills and things on it. So it would not be the same exact
it
ride. You could call
it
it that.
probably
It could be
wouldn't have been the
similar,
same ride
but
in
it would be
in
different.
1978 when they were designing the Beast too, though. It probably would have been closer than
Exactly.
now, but it wouldn't have been exact same. And in
Exactly.
today's world, it'll probably have individual lap bars and seat belts and stuff. So you wouldn't be riding the same experience regardless. But yeah, so Labor Day 1971, last operating day of Old Coney in Cincinnati, Ohio, which was the mother of our favorite park, Kings Island. I'm Ryan Sir along with Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics.